Welcome to Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works, a podcast for teachers, instructional coaches, administrators, and anyone else who supports teachers in the classroom. This show is a proud member of the BE Podcast Network, shows that help you go beyond education. Find all our shows at bepodcastnetwork.com. I am Gene Tavernetti, the host for this podcast, and my goal for this episode, like all episodes, is that you laugh at least once and that you leave with an actionable idea for better teaching. A quick reminder, no cliches, no buzzwords, only stuff that works. After nearly 60 episodes of Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works, I'm very excited today to have our first guest talk about science in the elementary classrooms. My guest today is Dr. Olivia Mullins. She is the founder and executive director of Science Delivered, a science education nonprofit focused on elementary science and educational equity in San Diego. She also runs a program called Learning Squared, which provides multi-week science and literacy program for early elementary school classrooms. She has developed, implemented, and refined numerous elementary science programs and projects and has taught over 1,000 science labs. She's the lead developer of the Learning Squared Science and Literacy program. Prior to her work at Science Delivered, Dr. Olivia was a neuroscientist working at the University of California, San Diego. She received her BA from Boston College in 2004 and her PhD in neuroscience from University of Virginia in 2012. She is also the author of the Kids Science Experiment book, Experimenting with Science, published through the Junior for Dummies series. I think you're going to like this one. Olivia, thank you so much for being a guest on Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Gosh, I'm trying to think where I found you. Somewhere on Twitter, like we run into a lot of folks these days. And then when I had a chance to chat with you a little bit and find out, what people now know about you and your biography, I thought I was very interested that here is a university academic and then you become the founder of a science program for elementary schools. Can you talk a little bit about that, how that happened and how you got interested in doing that?
Oh, sure. And first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. So, I was in neuroscience. I got my PhD in neuroscience, and we came out to California. But I'd always liked kind of, some of the social aspects of trying to get people interested in science, get kids interested in science, getting more women in science. So it was kind of a natural fit for me to switch over to doing this elementary education. In grad school, we'd always done a brain awareness day, and we'd gone into the elementary schools and we told them about the brain. And so, actually, when I had my son, and we had my husband and myself had the two body problem, where if I had to go get another job, it would be difficult. And my son and I thought, well, what if I just did this outreach full time, kind of like I did for the Brain Awareness Week? And I thought an elementary would be fun because I could do all the topics because I love neuroscience, but I thought it might be fun to, do a variety of things. So I started Science Delivered, and the original idea was for it to be in school field trips, kind of, where we could do the hands-on part. But over time, it's evolved to be more academic and more curriculum oriented.
So what happened? What were your experiences that made it become more academic? Well, let me back up a little bit, even before that. So you work in schools, or is your group contracted by schools, by school districts? Who are your clients?
We get mostly funding through grants. So I did find early on I at least found it difficult to work with the schools to get funding. So I apply for grants, or our organization applies for grants, and then we use that money to go into the schools at no cost to the schools most often. There are some, exceptions here and there. And then we work with Title I low income schools.
So I hate to disagree with you right off the bat, but it doesn't matter if stuff is free sometimes, for schools. So what's your pitch to schools? Do they really, why science? What makes them interested? What does that look like when you go into the schools? What are you offering to them?
Sure. Okay. I have a few answers to this. Originally, I just met teachers sort of randomly, out and about, And they'd say, come into my classroom and try things out. And that's sort of how I got started in certain schools. And then, I might go with teacher X, and then the next time I came, I would go to the whole grade. And then maybe I would go to another grade, and then maybe they'd go to another school. So it was at the beginning, it was a little bit random. And I pretty quickly had more requests than time. So, if you're doing it just sort of, there's a lot of elementary schools in San Diego. So there's no dearth of classrooms to go into. But then now I am collaborating with an organization that works in a certain geographic area, and they work with a certain set of schools. So then with that, we did have to pitch to the schools. And that, yeah, sometimes some people are more interested than others. Some teachers are more interested than others, but by and large, I've had a very positive experience. I would say the most common kind of attitude is the teachers see the value in the science, wish they could do more of it, and just feel like their hands are tied. It's complicated, they don't have the support, and they have so much on their plates already.
So can you kind of expand on that? Some things that teachers have, how they've responded to your lessons in the classroom and how they wish that they could do more. But I don't know, did you just say their hands were tied, or
Yeah, they just,
what are some of the challenges that they have talked about with you with respect to science?
we do take surveys, and pretty much every teacher answers that they don't have time for science. Well, no, wait, let me rephrase that. When we ask what the barriers are to doing more science, they say they don't have time and other subjects take priority. Pretty much, I would say almost all or all the teachers check that box. And from there's a variety of other answers that depend on, we get differences from different teachers. Some schools really pretty much have very little curriculum support. Our district developed a science curriculum. It's a STEAM curriculum. It has a lot of different things in there, but it's not rolled out to all the elementary schools yet. So the elementary schools that don't have that rolled out are supposed to be using FOSS kits, which were what they used before the NGSS standards launched about 12, 13 years ago. And so they weren't really aligned to the NGSS standards. So it's been over a decade. And the curriculum, I think that district curriculum just got finished a year or two ago. So there's just not this curriculum support for a lot of the teachers. Maybe the administration doesn't find it to be a priority. And for dual language teachers, which we have many dual language classrooms, that's an even bigger challenge.
So when you go in now, so we've got, the new standards,
mhm.
relatively new. They're not
Yeah.
brand new, they're relative, the newer ones.
Mhm.
Do people expect you to follow those standards? Is that what they're looking for? Are they looking for direct support in that? Or uh, what's your goal when you go in to a
Well, I've
classroom?
always aligned to the standards. So with some exceptions, like I do air in kindergarten because I think that's important, even though it's not explicitly in the standards. I think most teachers are looking for, well, when I was doing just kind of the one-offs, I think they're kind of looking for a fun, experiential, educational experience for their kids. Now that we're doing the longer programming, I have to, what are they looking for specifically? Let me say this. I think a lot of the teachers appreciate that we are providing this standard aligned support and that we are integrating it with literacy. And now that we are in the classroom more and asking for more time, I think there probably are some mixed, not a ton. I mean, I think most teachers really like what we're doing, but it is a lot of time, and time is really precious in elementary school. So I think when we came, 1, 2, 3 times a year, everyone's happy with that. When it's 12 weeks in a row and we have lesson extensions we're asking them to do, which some don't, that's where I think it can get a little harder to fit in.
So when you're doing those 12 lessons in a row,
Hmm.
are, is that something, again, that it has been requested by the school?
We ish. The schools requested from our collaborator more literacy support during the pandemic. At the same time, I was interested in doing more literacy integrated with science. Now, I had some really pure motives because I did think literacy and science should be combined, but I also had some cynical motives, which is that I saw that science was not a priority. And I thought, well, if I want teachers in schools to do more science, I'm going to have to integrate it with literacy so they'll be interested. I mean, that was my thinking. And so it just so happened that the principals were requesting this integrated approach at the same time I was thinking of it. And that's where this, what we call Learning Squared Science and Literacy Integrated Program came from. But over time, that's when I really started to dig into the research. And now I just see this is clearly the way everyone should do it all the time. I definitely look back and think, well, whatever, it was a kind of a field trip experiential, but clearly this is the way to go. And one thing that really stuck out to me in the beginning, I worked with a woman from the California Reading and Literature Project, and she said, let's do word work with the word absorb before we do this lesson on what materials absorb water. And I just thought it sounded so boring, I'll be honest. I thought, why would we do that? So so she says, no, it's good. So I said, okay, you're the expert. So we do this word work, and I was just shocked at how much students responded. And just from my perspective, I felt understood the material better. And so I really told her I was completely dead wrong. This is the way to do it. And, I was really convinced from that moment that this was the way.
Okay, so now you've got me intrigued here. So you've gone from being like a show,
Hmm.
to now we're going to be in the classroom for extended periods of time, integrated, with literacy, and you're convinced after seeing how this work has done pre-lesson, this literacy work has been done pre-lesson, how much more content the kids are able to absorb and understand.
Hmm.
Isn't that a little bit different than what the standards call for? Don't they want a lot of, and maybe I'm wrong, like let's discover this, let's do exploration. I'm not going to explain anything, or am I
Yeah.
mischaracterizing? I,
Uh,
I
Depends who you talk to, I guess. Yes, NGSS. Now, before I'm critical, I want to, say that there are a lot of things in NGSS that I like a lot. I don't dislike the scientific method, but I think it was limited. I love the practices. I think that's more representative of how scientists do experiments. So the NGSS, it's called three-dimensional learning. They have the content standards, and they have what they call the scientific and engineering practices. And then they have these things called cross-cutting concepts. So I mean, the practices I think are fantastic. And there's a lot you can do with integrating literacy there and math, especially math for probably older students. I do work with primarily early elementary. So there's a lot of good in there, but I think, and relevance is good, all that's good. But yes, there is this idea that you should withhold information from students for quite a prolonged period of time. And that I think is just so wrong-headed. And it's really it's a leading focus in the NGSS standards. And I have, in discussions, you'll see people sometimes saying, well, NGSS just tells you the standards, they don't tell you how to teach. But that's not really true either, because there are a lot of like NGSS recommended ways to teach. And the other indication of what NGSS quote wants is that they give design badges to certain curriculum. And there's only one curriculum that has there's consistently received their design badges, and that's Open Sci Ed. And Open Sci Ed does not, to my knowledge, require students to learn vocabulary. It's sort of like an optional thing. Students are supposed to kind of use their own language, and they do talk about integration with literacy, but not teaching vocabulary is really opposed to that goal. And I think also when you don't teach the content from the get go, you are losing all those experiences of practice. Like we know in the science of learning that students need all this retrieval, they need practice time, they need to go over the content over and over again. And if you're not getting to the quote unquote answer until the end of the unit, and then you're moving on, you've just lost all that practice time. And I think, especially for young students, there's so many opportunities for misconceptions to come up and stick. And I think the other criticisms are valid too. I think you're saying that, students shouldn't learn from the teacher, but maybe their peer is going to explain it to them. I mean, I think a lot
I'm
of things.
sorry. I'm sorry. I, that one always makes me chuckle. You know, I know teachers have said a kid will come up with a question and they'll say, well, did you ask your partner yet?
Hmm.
Ask your
Hmm.
partner first. And I'm thinking, I'm going to go to the source, baby.
Right.
Why do I want to do this? I've never understood that one, but so you say you work at Title I schools and you work in
Hmm.
various types of schools.
Hmm.
So do you have district people that want to coordinate with what you're doing, or are you pretty much left alone in these schools?
I'm left alone, but I'm trying to be unleft alone. I've generally worked from a bottom-up approach. You know, going in through the teachers, I've always found that easiest. There are some schools I've worked with for 10 years, and our science and literacy programming, that extended programming, is relatively new. So this is only the third year we're doing it. And so we have the second and third grade pretty set up, and we're going to be in 8 schools this year. And next year it should be 11. And if the funding comes through after that, we should be in those 11 schools eventually, K through 3. So this is still a pretty new initiative. I'm building the first grade out this year. I haven't done the first grade yet. And I've always just, I always want more, I guess. So you succeed in this one thing and then you think, well, wouldn't it be great if we could do this too? You know, so I think it's so frustrating because I work so closely with teachers, and what I find is that teachers are working so hard and they're
Yes.
just not given the tools that they need. And it's so frustrating to see good teachers. I mean, teachers who have great classroom management, teachers who know all these things, but their curriculum is leaves a lot to be desired. They're stuffed full with just too much. Classrooms that are sometimes 1/3 of the kids have IEPs, endless meetings. I mean, it's just there's so much on their plate. And it's like on the other side, we know enough to teach, to support them in teaching kids in a way that will be more successful for everyone. And so that disconnect is just very frustrating. And it frustrates me, I think, probably almost every day when you think about it. Because it's not that the teachers are doing what they should be doing within the context of what they are given. That's how I
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah. Well, I've been working with teachers for a long time, and in elementary, I don't know if I have ever worked with a teacher on a science lesson. And the reason is that when we were hired, usually because of math and language arts scores.
Yes. Yes.
And now you're talking about science, and literacy, same way we're talking about, social studies and literacy.
Hmm.
Is that helping you gain momentum? Are you kind of on the coattails of all the science of reading stuff and literacy stuff? Is that helping move people along and helping you spread your message of integrating science?
We will see because a lot of the teachers I work with, I have been working with for quite a while. And so there's a lot of relationship there and trust. It is just really this fall, like next week, that we are starting to expand to a lot more schools. So I think it'll be interesting to see how our program is received from teachers who I haven't had this years long relationship with, or, a year long relationship with the teacher next door. Because I will say I have been pretty well received generally. One other thing I want to say is I am K through 3. Kinder and first, I think there's less pressure there on the time. And so I think in those people in those areas, there is more reception to kind of this outside stuff and kids need to play more. I am hoping, I am hopeful that the idea that content knowledge is needed for reading comprehension is something that we can latch on to. And I'm developing some modules or I'm looking around to see what resources exist to have our teachers go through. This is some very mini, easy professional development to say like, hey, this is not only important for science, but the vocabulary and the information they're getting here should pay it forward in reading. I mean, right, reading tests. I mean, that's what everyone cares about. So, if you do not only our program, but if you do science, if you do social studies, you will see a change, third, fourth, fifth grade in the reading comprehension.
So, as you work in these schools, is there much coordination with administration, guidance, or are you seen pretty much as an expert and given, pretty much how you want to go?
I'm mostly left, yeah, mostly we come and do our program. So now in the new schools, I'm doing that in collaboration with another organization. I'm working with that organization's staff. That organization has already been providing science programming to these 11 schools. So the coordination with the administration is on their end. And we bring our program in and we come in once a week and we say, here's what we're doing. And I have daily lesson extensions that the teachers can do, but it is up to them if they do them or not. I found in second grade, a lot of the teachers did a fair amount of them. Last year was our first third grade year, and there was not a lot of, uh, most classrooms, I think, were not doing a lot of them. I suspect that's because it was a little more work, like it was more informational reading, or because third grade is just, there's more pressure on testing and that sort of thing. So we will see this year. I think I've improved lesson extensions, so we'll see if people do them. I try to make things like a video, that you can just put on and it's 5 minutes. But I think even that little bit of reinforcement helps a lot when we come in. The third grade is very difficult for us to teach once a week. You're doing friction, electrical forces. It's very hard to come in for 1 hour and have the kids really learn in a deep way. So, in that sense, the teachers control how much of the learning happens with the students.
So is there any, I don't want to say accountability, but I can't think of another word right now. Anything, you're there, you have a
Hmm.
great time once a week, and
Hmm.
that's it? Is there anything beyond that? Or,
So this, yes, this is always a discussion, really. So we do an assessment at the end, but of course I make the assessment, and we don't do a pre-assessment because everything you do in the classroom is precious, and it's just asking for another hour to do, half hour is a big deal. It costs us money. The students do about how I feel they'll do on that, which at least tells me that, okay, I have a sense of how much they're learning. We do teacher surveys, both about the programming and about the lesson extensions. But yeah, data is very difficult. I mean, and science learning is much harder. You can test reading, you can have students read and see how well they do. It is much harder to evaluate science learning, and it's even harder to evaluate it with some teachers doing the extension, some not. This has been a topic of discussion for years. And I feel that I just know I'm always using best practices, always refining, always watching the students, that informal feedback. But yeah, accountability on our end. I mean, our funder asks, we give them the assessment data, we give them the teacher survey data, and that's what I can do right now.
okay,
Anything you
but
do more is more time from the students.
so you're working with students. Do you do any training with the teachers? Or let me ask, or do you do any training with the teachers? And when you're in the classrooms, are the teachers required to be in there and be a part of the lesson also?
They are required to be in there. Most do engage. Sometimes they do prep work, which I don't even completely begrudge them because just what's put on them is a lot. But I'm not a certified teacher, so it's they have to be in there. And sorry, what was the other part of your question?
Do you provide training to teachers?
Oh,
Any,
yeah, that
yeah.
is yes. No, I mean, I have made some short modules and those are not ready yet. Talking kind of about reading comprehension and content knowledge. But I have some plans that we'll see. But what I would actually like to do is take some literacy programming and see if we can get that into the schools so that we would more facilitate training from other people and then talk to the teachers about how they can integrate that literacy training with our science content. And maybe it's early to say this, but one Story Champs is this oral language program for young students, and I can just perfectly, I'm very excited to do this. I'm going to fit that with our science knowledge. And the idea is, young students can't read or write very well, but they can speak and listen. And so if you really have this explicit focus on oral language and vocabulary, academic language in a very structured way, that when they are starting to read and write, then they're not, just bamboozled by all these large academic
Right,
words.
right.
And the way that they have that set up, it's so beautiful because they're these short stories and there's like illustrations that go along with them, but there's something you can make very quickly. And therefore I can go and write a little story that goes along with our science content. So I'm extremely excited for this for K1 to maybe 3. But it'll be a little time to get that.
The reason that I ask that is you talk about the time limitations and the more that these things can be integrated more seamlessly, you can create them and in your head, oh, I see how this works, but it's beyond you. If you're only in there for an hour a week, I
Hmm.
mean, there are things that I would imagine that might need to be explained
Hmm.
beyond split attention, doing prep work. But that's beyond you. I mean,
Yes.
you're a contractor in there and you
Yeah.
can only do what you can do. Um,
Yes. But, who knows in the future? Because that's, I mean, that's what I'd love to be able to do. You're only one person and can only do so much, right? But
right.
I mean, that would be a goal, right? I mean, that the ultimate goal is not just science, it's positive outcomes for kids. So I'm always looking for how can we do more? And then when I've found some of these literacy programs that I like that feel very accessible, that is something I'm now looking into. Like, can we get this, maybe we can talk to the principals and get this training. As I've said, the expansion into these other schools is new. So, we'll see. But I think I am never really interested in just stopping, like, okay, we've done this and that's enough.
Right.
Because it's not enough. I don't want to, do you want to just pick around the edges for forever? Or maybe we could actually see some real progress.
So we know that teachers, are very focused on literacy and social studies, and now you're going to bring literacy and science. Is there anything in your experience in working with teachers, are there some limitations in knowledge about science, maybe that they need,
Uh,
that if they knew that some things, if sometimes if they just had a little bit of knowledge about this, then they could choose some of the things that they are reading and work on literacy with, or or are they lacking in that? Do they need some training in that?
I think that could be a thing to look at, but I don't think it's the thing. I think if you have a curriculum, that's the first thing. I think the issue is like, material management, for instance, is a bigger issue than I think teacher content knowledge in science. Like, do they have the supplies? And then you're with a bunch of first graders, you have to pass all these things out. They're spilling the water, that is very stressful when they're the one person in the room and maybe you have a hard class and maybe you have two kids that really never listen very well. So I'm not going to say that's not something to look at, but I think for early elementary, I would say that's like a second tier problem.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
holistic, right? Like holistic, you want them to have the information. And I think if they have a good curriculum and they have the support and they have the time to do it, that's the number one thing. And then if that was all taken care of, then I would look at content knowledge.
And I think the content knowledge, I've always kind of expressed it this way to teachers, the old standards. And, they would have in fourth grade, they would have standards, physics standards about students would understand, they'd know that
Mm,
energy travels in waves,
mm-hmm,
sound waves, water waves,
mm-hmm,
etc. And then in physics in high school, the standard was students will understand energy travels in waves.
mm-hmm.
Basically the same thing. So what I would say to the teachers is they need to understand this at the 10-year-old level
Yes,
or the
yes,
8-year-old level. And so you are, to try to defend your comment here, like it's not that important because they're understanding it at a 7-year-old level.
right,
And that's
right.
all you can do. That's all you can do at that point.
Like we all
Oh,
thought our taste buds, sugar was in front or what, and that was wrong, but we all survived. Yeah, But if you have enough right, I think that's what you want.
yeah. Well, and I think one of the things you mentioned, a while back, and I would like you to elaborate on that a little bit. You made a comment about the scientific method. Talk about that.
Mm,
And let me tell you why I bring that up. I mean, it really, my ears perked up when you said that, because one of the things that we want students to be able to do is, I'm doing air quotes because the
mm,
21st century skills, we had the
mm,
21st
mm,
century skills. And, we're going to do problem solving. And it seems to me the most agreed upon way to solve problems is the scientific method.
Okay.
And it is generalized, like when you did your, I don't know how they do PhDs, your thesis or what you had to do for yours, but for mine, you have a statement of the problem. You do your
Mm-hmm.
lit review. What do we know about this already?
Mm-hmm.
And you set up your methodology. And it's kind of that's the way we solve problems again naturally in the
Mm-hmm.
world. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but my criticism of that in the way it's taught in schools is that if you're taking math, here's how you solve problems. If you're doing, it's all different, but we
Mm-hmm.
should teach a universal. And the one
Mm-hmm.
thing, okay, I'm on my soapbox here. The one thing we always skip is what do we already know?
Yeah, yes, yeah, yeah.
And that's my criticism of like the discovery part. Before
Mm-hmm.
we, that's not what scientists do.
Mm-hmm.
What have we done already?
Right.
What do we already know? And okay, so our listeners can't see this, but you are shaking your head affirmatively. So what's your thoughts? How do you respond to my tirade here?
Oh, so many thoughts. Okay, let me try to organize them. So I think the scientific method is good. The issue can be the way it's taught in schools is quite rigid. And I do remember when I was a practicing scientist and I would go to classrooms and try to fit what I was doing into that, I felt it didn't quite fit. You know, I will say I'm always very nuanced and, want things to be very particular. And I felt frustrated, like, I don't know, this feels a little like not quite right. I think it fits some experiments really well, but the actual process of doing science is kind of messy. So I like the scientific method as like this is sort of one structure, but it's a lot messier than this in reality. And what the practices do is they've just very well described the practices of science. It's asking questions, analyzing data, the one at the end is communicating information, and a bunch of things like that you are doing in science. So it's just a little more capturing all these different pieces of doing science and not making them in such a rigid structure. I think there's value to looking at both of them, both the NGSS practices and the scientific method, because I think they come at it in different ways and that both are helpful. But I do think it's nice to have structure, right? Like sometimes you do want to just tell your students this is the way it is. It gives them
Yeah.
something to latch on to in the beginning. But it's science, it's just much more of an iterative process than the
Well,
scientific.
and I think that's what everything we do in second grade. I mean,
Hmm.
there's a lot more to it than this, but
Yeah.
we need to learn this first. You're going to go play piano, you learn some scales, and you learn
Hmm.
this first. And
Hmm.
now we're going to, someday maybe you'll be a jazz
Right. Right.
pianist, but first we're going to first things first. Okay. Now, you did not address my biggest
Oh,
issue,
okay.
and either you're just being nice or you didn't want to think
No,
about it.
there was a lot.
Okay. And that's the idea that we don't take a look at what do we already know
Oh,
about this.
okay. So here's my question. Actually, I had a question for that. Are you talking about with students in their learning, or are you talking about teaching them to look at what we already know? Because, because NGSS actually, in terms of their learning, a big part of it is before you look at a topic, you talk about what you already know, activating prior knowledge. And that is a big piece of NGSS. But then there's teaching students to research what we already know, which is that I'm sure that, I think that's kind of in the NGSS. But yes, I think that's quite important. I guess yeah. Can you define where exactly what you would like to see instead? And then I can better answer it.
No, of course not, because I'm so nuanced. No, well, I think, for example, one of the things, I don't know how old I was, but I wasn't, 7 or 8.
Hmm.
The idea that, we're going to do this experiment and that part of science is seeing if we get the same answer, verifying
I
things,
see. Yes. Okay. I
you
see
know,
what you're saying.
yeah. And that's important. you
Oh,
know,
yes. Okay.
and it becomes, as you talk about it, as you said, it becomes more and more sophisticated and more nuanced. And
Hmm.
guess what? You had a successful, your experiment was successful because you got the same results as everybody else got.
Oh, okay. Yes, I'm in full agreement. They have to do science and do what scientists do in order, when they're learning science. And as someone who was a scientist, I'd always be like, in Facebook going, well, scientists go to a lot of lectures. Scientists read a lot of textbooks when they're in school, and then they read a lot of papers when they're there's just so much training. And then when you are first doing an experiment, no matter how experienced you are, if you are doing something new, you repeat as exactly as you can what someone else did first. And, that's the language we talk about in my hands, or in their hands when they did this experiment, this happened. In my hands, this happened. And you see if you can replicate the experiment. And you're exactly right. It's such an important part of science. And what I also am irked about with that is all this talk about authenticity. But then you're giving second graders, third graders, you know, projects where you know the answer and we're kind of pretending you don't. Well, that's not authentic. That's extremely inauthentic.
Thank
Instead,
you. Thank
right?
you, Olivia.
Instead of saying, hey, we know, let's see if we can prove it, which is
Yes.
actually authentic. And so that drives me crazy. And that's why I was so happy to come find the science of learning community where that irritation of mine was confirmed because you know, I just thought this is just ridiculous. You're taking this one part of science, the most exciting part, and then pretending that's all that science is, or that students have to do that part. And now I have the language to understand that students are novices, and you don't learn as a novice by copying the experts. You learn as a student and you become an expert, and then you engage in expert level activities.
Well, and this is another part of the scientific method. I guess we could lump it into the scientific method. And we're talking about doing some sort of experiment or lab activity, but also just the idea of learning, discovery learning. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So you know that last night my TV went out.
Know that.
And so yeah, you wouldn't know that unless I told you. And so I turned it off. The first thing, turn it on, turn it off, and then, unplug it 30 seconds. Okay, plug it back in, and I'm trying everything. And then it came back on.
Hmm.
And you know what was wrong? Neither do I. Because, because did I record everything that I did? Did I record the order that I did it? I don't know the
Hmm.
last thing that happened, you
Hmm.
know? And that's my issue.
Hmm.
Just because you got something to go right doesn't
Hmm.
mean you learned anything,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, and to me that again is part of that scientific method is, what was your methodology?
Hmm. Hmm.
Did you replicate that? What would you change, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera, et
Right.
cetera. And I'm not a scientist at all, but just, somebody who's interested in learning
Hmm.
and thinks that some of the things that we say are just not true. They didn't learn it. They did it. They completed the
Yeah.
task,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean they learned anything.
And to be fair, I would say that would be okay, well, I would say that would actually be a guided inquiry person's criticism of what they like to call cookie cutter experiments. They did the thing, but they didn't learn. And then with discovery, I do think most serious people are kind of don't agree on discovery. We all think discovery. I mean, the NGSS people, it is not discovery, but I think there's not a lot of assessment in NGSS. And so you don't know if they're learning and you don't know if they did it or maybe their lab partner did it.
You're right.
And the goals are kind of vague. So I think, in the cookie cutter experiment, they will say that, you did this, but did you learn? And I think that's a valid criticism if you don't teach it right. I mean, I think you can always teach without learning, right? And so what you need to really make sure to do is after you do the activity, if you are quote mimicking, because the students have, They have the motor control of an 8-year-old, or there, there's all these things that you have to really think about when you're doing these activities with kids. There's so many factors to really make sure that you are talking about it after, talking about it before, making sure they learned it. And maybe that all that can't go on realistically during the activity, but you have that, I think you have that memory of the activity, and activities are pretty memorable for most kids. I mean, they love them. And so you can do all that deeper learning and reference back to that hands-on piece you did. And that is what I'm building out. As I've become more academic in my work, that is the part I'm really building out, is this just repeated kind of talking about it, writing about it. What did you do? Why did you do it? And that focused attention, trying to remove, it's hard. I mean, it's hard, but trying to remove that extraneous information. Like I've occasionally made things less fun because I thought the fun was, you want things fun, but sometimes they're too fun and that can override the learning. So,
Yeah. Well, all I know about working in labs, I've seen in movies.
mhm.
And anytime I saw the people in the labs laughing, it was a parody of scientists. You know, they were usually pretty serious folks, doing serious work.
Mhm.
Gosh, I just love talking about this stuff, Olivia. Do you have any questions for me,
All right, I
Olivia?
do. It is a little bit, well, it's not unrelated to our conversation, but I have a question about worked examples for you in science.
Okay.
So everyone talks about worked examples, but I am never clear how worked examples apply to my work because we're not doing very quantitative stuff with the kids. And I can understand it, if you're doing a framework, but is a worked example something that would apply to most elementary science outside of procedures? Or is that something that's just more for math?
Well, since I don't know exactly what you do, I would think of a worked example of well, let's use ELA for a second, and then you
Hmm.
tell me if it applies. Like, let's say we were asking students to do some sort of evaluate, that people who know me say, yeah, you use that all the time. But we're going to we're going to evaluate the impact of setting on a story.
Okay.
All right. And so before I can have them do that,
Hmm.
let's say I'm going to have them write a paragraph,
Hmm.
okay, about it. I would present them a paragraph of this is what it looks like when it's done.
Okay.
Because it's pretty abstract to say, well,
Yes.
not only how do I do it, but how will I know that I'm done? So,
Hmm.
so I can imagine. So with that, the first thing that comes to the top of my mind is like a lab report. What's a lab report going to look like?
Okay.
How
Okay.
are you going to, here's a worked example of collecting your data,
Okay.
you know, so it might be portions of it.
Okay.
And I always call it, what before how.
Okay.
So I know what my target is. So many times when they talk about it in math, the worked example is exemplifying a procedure that you've done. But this is just providing a target, a model. I hate to use the word model because that's confusing, in education, but just a target exemplar. How about that?
Okay.
A target exemplar. And it might even include, a rubric, maybe,
Hmm.
you know,
Okay. All
but
right.
that's how I would look at it. Is that helpful? Does that make
Yes. In
sense?
fact, I was literally, I have been working on how best to do a lab report for third graders before we got on. So that's right on. Yeah. So it's more with the procedures. It wouldn't be really the content knowledge itself.
No, it's like this is what it's going to look like when you're
Okay.
done.
Okay.
And then as you're pointing out the content knowledge, then you could say, see where it is here, see where all this, see where this information is now, where the repository of this information is. It's in different
Hmm.
places. But without that exemplar, it's
Hmm.
difficult to talk about. It's just too abstract.
Okay. All right. I do have a second question, but are we out of time?
No, gosh, Olivia got lots of time.
All right. All right. My second question is you mentioned certain curriculum, maybe you like more or less because they might say something you should, say that you should teach something, but they don't say how to teach it. Are you talking about scripts here, or is there something more that you want to see? And as a second part, how much should the curriculum tell you how to teach versus maybe having these techniques available elsewhere, and then the curriculum is maybe shorter and simpler.
Well, I think, I know you're talking about the criticism. We had a prior conversation and I
Hmm.
was criticizing something. A big thing that the kids need, what they don't have is how to organize content,
Okay.
because you can't organize until you know the content. So if I was going to teach anything, the first thing that I would want to tell the kids is, this is how I think about this content. This is how I organize it.
Hmm.
So for example, what's again off the top of my head, we're talking to some biology teachers the other day about organelles. Okay. And you say, okay, so how many organelles are there in a cell? I don't know. Let's say there are 9. Okay. I don't know.
Hmm.
I'm making this up. Okay. Am I close? Am I pretty close?
I
Okay.
think, I'm not going to say a number because I feel like I'll be wrong.
Okay.
And there's more at stake for me.
Okay. So, but instead of talking about 9, would
Hmm.
say, you know what? Let's talk about what has to happen in the cell to stay alive. There needs
Hmm.
to be respiration. There needs
Hmm.
to be waste disposal. There
Hmm.
needs to be. So instead of, so when I think about these organelles, I think about the functions that they have. And so
Okay.
just like other functions, we're going to, it's this and this. And so
Okay.
now we're going to read some content. We're going to look at some content, and then we'll stop along the way. And I'm going to ask you, so as you're reading about this, which function is this?
Okay.
So
Okay.
you could do that with any content, but you need to, and I know you have my book, Teach Fast. It's where I say, tell the story. You're telling the story about organelles.
Hmm.
And you're not only telling the story, but you're saying, this is how I think about it.
Okay.
This is how I organize it. I'm an expert. I know about this. This is how I organize it.
Interesting.
And that's
Okay.
how I'm going to present it to you.
Okay. Yeah, I've gotten your book recently, so I have I've gone through parts of it, but not everything. So I am looking forward to that. I like that, and I think I'm weak in that, that story part. That's something that's not always obvious to me how to do. So it's helpful to hear that.
You know what I think of is Wikipedia. I'm
Hmm.
not saying, you go to Wikipedia but you take a look at how it's organized. You search for something and it's got like this paragraph
Yeah, yeah.
and it's an overview. And then you know what's down below? All the pieces, the
Hmm.
expanded,
Hmm.
and that's kind of the way I think about telling that story,
Huh, okay.
you know,
Well, I think the way
and
you, did it is better
yeah.
than Wikipedia, maybe though.
Well, thank you.
Okay. That, and then I have a comment about something I read in your book that I appreciated, which was a story about a science teacher who had a fun demo, but it didn't fit. And I appreciated that you told him to move the demo instead of remove the demo,
Yeah.
because I do think there's a place for fun and excitement, especially in science. And it should be not prioritized all the time or even 80% of the time, but I think it's important to give the kids that spark and excitement. Besides the spark and excitement of success.
No, I do too. Absolutely. And I think it's even more fun when they understand it.
Yes.
I could just imagine a teacher, going to the last part of the demonstration and looking out and say, what do you think's going to happen? What do you think's going to happen
Mhm.
now?
Yes.
And they have a pretty good idea because they've learned it.
Yes.
So,
Well, awesome. Okay.
Olivia, this was a pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope we see each other again in real life since we
Oh,
live
I
so
hope so
close.
too. Thank you so much. This is really fun for me to be on here. I think it's the second podcast I've done in my life, so it's very exciting.
Well, I think people are going to get a lot and they're going to enjoy it because I think science, as most of our conversation was about, people, teachers, because it's not a priority, they don't get a lot of training in it.
Yes.
All right, Olivia, we will see you soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
If you're enjoying these podcasts, tell a friend. Also, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can follow me on Blue Sky at G Tavernetti, on Twitter, X, at G Tavernetti, and you can learn more about me and the work I do at my website, tesscg.com. That's tesscg.com, where you will also find information about ordering my books, Teach Fast, Focused Adaptable Structured Teaching, and maximizing the impact of coaching cycles.